substantial progress in meeting the goal of finding the additional $7 million. But as the 2 weeks came to a close, we were short of the goal of about approximately $200,000. My team and I considered how the Internal Services Fund's operating reserves could be used to bridge the $200,000 gap. We discussed reducing the amount of the operating reserves and using the money freed up by the reduction to come up with the $200,000 of the $7 million that Mayor Adams had directed OMF to find for the general fund. When I proposed using the Internal Services Fund's operating reserves, I was unaware of any prohibition against making a transfer of Internal Services funds to the general fund. Indeed, OMF's own fund balance procedures state the use of reserves is open and flexible, meaning that they can be used for any fund activity. The same document provides that operating reserves are available for internally financed projects and projects that improve productivity. In an effort to ensure that the transferring of operating reserves that I was proposing complied with city policies and practices, I asked Mr. Goward and Mr. Scott whether there was city precedent for transferring operating reserves to the general fund without engaging in a complex analysis to return a percentage of those funds to the non-general fund bureau. I asked him to help me determine if making such a transfer would violate some law, rule, city policy that I had failed to consider. As an administrator overseeing a 650-employee organization, it was customary for me to rely on my senior managers in this way. I expected Mr. Goward and Mr. Scott would either know the answer or would research the issue and get back to me. While our recollections at this point apparently different, I can tell you with certainty that neither Mr. Goward nor Mr. Scott advised me that the way that I was going to propose the transfer of operating reserves from the Internal Services Fund to the general fund was improper. In fact, they failed to provide me with any meaningful input when I sought their advice about using the operating reserves. Instead of providing me with specific information related to the City of Portland's charter, policies, rules, or laws specific to Portland, Mr. Goward and Mr. Scott provided me with a general recommendation against using the operating reserves that included non-general fund contribution to bridge the $200,000 gap. Neither Mr. Goward nor Mr. Scott provided any support for their position. Another employee provided me with a copy of an article of a lawsuit in Tacoma, Washington related to improper transfer of utility funds. I did not, however, find this article instructive because it did not address rules, policies, or laws applicable to the City of Portland. In the absence of concrete support for their recommendation against the transfer that I was proposing and lacking other viable suggestions, I told Mr. Goward and Mr. Scott that OMF needed to proceed with proposing the transfer of non-general fund operating reserves to bridge the remaining $200,000 gap. I also told Mr. Goward and Mr. Scott that if these funds were transferred and others disagreed with my judgment call, I would take full responsibility for the mistake and correct it. I told them this because, as Chief Administrative Officer, I recognize the importance of taking accountability for my decisions, particularly in areas where there is disagreement about the course of action to take. I had no intentions of claiming ignorance or saying oops. As the city erroneously stated in the report the city released to the public. Ultimately, I made the judgment call to move forward with proposing using operating reserves to fund part of the $7 million Mayor Adams sought to add to the general fund. Certainly, if Mr. Goward or Mr. Scott or anyone else had suggested that using operating reserves in this way would violate the city charter, any law, rule, or policy, I would have not proceeded with recommending the proposed transfer. In hindsight, I find it curious that Mr. Gower and Mr. Scott neglect to mention to me at the time that during the development of the 2011-2012 fiscal budget, they carried through with a transfer comparable to the one that I was proposing when they transferred operating reserves from the facility's internal services fund to the general fund to help purchase the county building. While I must infer that they changed their minds about the viability of this approach, it seems disingenuous for them to accuse me of misconduct for proposing the very type of transaction that they had used in the past. Now that I am aware of this past practice, it further supports the conclusion that the guidelines for such a transfer was not totally clear. Mr. Gower and Mr. Scott were not disciplined or publicly criticized for their action. In a June 2012 routine budget meeting in Mayor Adams' office before submitting the mayor's proposed budget to council, the topic of transferring operating reserves to the general fund was discussed. One of the deputy city attorneys in the meeting asked if OMF was going to use the operating reserves to support the general fund. I advised that deputy city attorney, along with everyone in the room, that the mayor proposed budget would include a transfer of operating reserves that included contributions from non-general fund bureaus to the general fund. During this discussion that followed, it was jointly decided that it would be best not to propose transferring operating reserves that were associated with non-general fund bureaus, including the Water Bureau and the Bureau of Environmental Services, to the general fund because of pending litigation against the city. Because of the feedback that I received in this meeting, OMF removed the proposal from the budget to transfer non-general fund operating reserves to the general fund. I also want to correct another erroneous statement in the report the city released to the public.